He was the silent teacher who was the heart of the karate youngster and whose wisdom impacted a generation. But Pat Morita's life was everything but tranquil behind the scenes. The guy who brought Mr. Miyagi to life finally spoke up before he died, telling what truly happened on set. It wasn't only about kicks, lines, or crane poses. It was about fights that no camera ever caught. What truth did he hold on to for so long, and why did he wait until the end to tell it? The wall in front of Miyagi. When people think of the Karate Kid, they think of Mr. Miyagi right away. He was a quiet handyman with a shrewd gaze, short words, and a gentle strength that helped Daniel LaRusso get through his hardest times. But most fans didn't know until Pat Morita spoke out years later that the man who became Miyagi didn't get the chance very often. One of the most influential people in Hollywood at the time was trying to keep him from getting the part at all. People mostly knew Pat Morita as a comedian. People recalled him for his funny TV appearances, quick one-liners, and the way he could make people laugh without even trying. For a lot of bosses, that resume made him the last person who could credibly play a mentor who had been through a lot of combat and had a lot of emotional scars. When casting sessions initially talked about Mr. Miyagi, Morita's name came up, but producer Jerry Weintraub quickly smacked it away. Weintraub, a big name in the business, is said to have yelled that he didn't want a comic anywhere near this area. He needed someone with gravity, someone who could make people believe in a guy who bore both tragedy and wisdom in quiet. It was the wall, and it stayed strong for weeks. Weintraub turned down every list that had Morita's name on it. He thought that America had a lot of actors who would do a better job. The producers and casting directors went somewhere else, going through headshots and calling in performers who looked, sounded, or at least had the pedigree that Weintraub sought. Pat Morita wasn't even thought of for a reading. But this is when fate started to change. Director John Avildsen, who had already shown he could tell good underdog stories with Rocky, didn't want to go down the same old road. He knew that the Karate Kid's success rested on more than just fighting and training montages. There had to be a connection between the mentor and the pupil. That seemed real and human, and he didn't want to miss anything. Avildsen said that every prospective candidate should be read, even if Weintraub didn't want them to. Later, Pat Morita would think about how strange it was. He was the last performer to be brought in, and by the time he got his turn, it was almost too late. He understood the irony. The producer had entirely ignored the actor, but now the director was still seeing him. That time. For an actor whose career had been limited to years of moving from modest TV roles to stand-up gigs, this was more than simply an audition. It was an unexpected chance to get a part that everyone else seemed determined to keep from him. Morita thought it was proof of how unpredictable Hollywood might be. One day, rejection could gently open a door the next day. Everyone loved Miyagi back then, so people could forget that there was a point, even if it was short, when the air was thick with tension during casting talks. Morita, on the other hand, would never forget it. Later in life, he talked frankly about how close Weintraub's group came to ruining the project before it ever begun. Morita said that John Avildsen's persistence influenced the trajectory of his whole career. This isn't simply another fight behind the scenes. It shows us how delicate the process of making movie legends can be. That one moment of judgment by one producer and one executive's lack of care made all the difference. Morita would never have gone inside the audition room if Avildsen hadn't been so firm. And if Morita hadn't been there, the narrative of the Karate Kid would have been different. The wall he finally faced would be a tough one for his artistic work, and as Pat himself would cheekily say throughout the years, walls should be climbed or cut through. Not long after that, he found himself on quite different footing, but not one that even the audience would have thought of as the polished clown they remembered. The man who went into that audition room wasn't the funny guy from TV. He had a beard and looked fatigued. He had just come back from Hawaii. Someone he could hardly see in the mirror. Fate, Hawaii, and a beard. By the early 1980s, Pat Morita's career was going in a direction that was not clear. He had been famous previously, from stand-up clubs to sitcoms like Happy Days, but the offers had slowed down, and he felt like the spotlight was slipping away. He didn't go to Hollywood to pursue gigs. Instead, he ended up in Hawaii, where he made a livelihood doing whatever job came his way. emceeing political fundraisers, writing ads, and playing in nightclubs. It wasn't fancy and it wasn't steady, but it paid the bills. People who didn't know Morita thought his career was slowly coming to an end. He felt like he was just treading water, waiting for something he couldn't see. Then he made a choice that changed how people saw him. He let his hair and beard grow out for the first time in his life, and it wasn't for a part. Not for a spectacle, but because he wanted to attempt something new. Pat joked about it later, claiming he looked more like a hippie than an actor. But back then, he didn't care. He wasn't worried about looking good on camera or chasing casting directors. He was just living his life, and his look showed that he was in a rough, unsure time. That scruffy beard, which was unusual for him, would turn out to be a stroke of luck. At the time, he didn't realize it, but that look helped make him look like a weathered man who had been through a lot when he finally got the chance to audition for the Karate Kid. It made him look older, wiser, and more down-to-earth than the comedians people were used to seeing. What began as a personal choice quickly turned into an unexpected gift for his career. Pat has always known that silence was the main thing in his life. In fact, he almost let his contract with his agency run out when it came up. But he changed his mind and gave his agency a sort of half-hearted reappointment. What the hell? So, one afternoon, he left his agent's office sure that there were no opportunities for him and ready to go back to Hawaii. This is when fate stepped in with a loud yell. A booming voice had yelled from above. Pat Morita. The secretary ran out and said that he had just left. The agent leant out and waved him back quickly. Pat, go back in here right now. I think I have the ideal script for you. The movie was The Karate Kid. It feels like a story that Hollywood would find too clean. Someone should make a movie on fate. Morita subsequently said that it felt more like a dream than a real moment. He was standing there with one foot out, ready to leave Los Angeles and knowing that there was nothing waiting for him here. And then, almost like a last-minute interception, the script hit him. He looked at it. He thought it was good. He said he would try out for John Avildsen. At that moment, it didn't feel like a big change in life. It was just another chance, another space, and another director. But then the timing, the beard, and the fact that they were brought back in at that exact moment all started to make sense for a bigger plan. Morita talked about this event with a sense of respect, as if he thought that maybe some unseen force had forced him back onto the right path. He wouldn't have looked like Miyagi if he hadn't been in Hawaii. If he hadn't quit with his agent, no one would have been able to provide him a script. If he hadn't shuffled his feet on the sidewalk that day, luck might have passed him by. All of those small choices, mistakes, and turns led to one open door. He had to audition for a part that the producers had never wanted him to read for. When he eventually got to the audition room, there were no executives or judges there. One man was tied to a camera and watched him via the lens. When Pat Morita finally got to read for the part of the Karate Kid, he thought it would be like all the other Hollywood auditions. A producer, a casting assistant, and maybe even a writer in the corner taking notes. Everyone was waiting to hear what he had to say. Instead, he stepped into a room that was almost empty and right into one of the oddest auditions he had ever been to. John Avildsen, the filmmaker who had already made a name for himself in film history with Rocky, was sitting there. But Avildsen wasn't just sitting behind a desk and looking over a script. He was a man and a machine at the same time. He held a camera in one hand. But he had the big battery pack strapped to his body. He said hello in a kind way, but he never put the camera down. The cameras started rolling as soon as Morita walked in. Later, Morita would joke that the first thing he thought about Avildsen was that he was half a guy, half a director, and half a recording device. But there was a serious point behind the humor. Avildsen didn't only want a well-written book. He wanted to know if Pat could be Miyagi when no one else thought he could by capturing the man's unvarnished presence. Avildsen said, "Tell me a little about yourself," still looking through the lens. Pat didn't read from a script, instead, he told anecdotes about his life, his profession, and the good and bad times. At that moment, he wasn't trying out in the usual way. He was letting people see who he truly was. And Avildsen kept going. Then the script came. Pat wasn't going to give a safe line or two for the hardest scenes that hadn't been staged, choreographed, or anything else yet. He made things up as he went along, putting all of his energy into the emotional weight of the role of Miyagi, without any sets, clothes, or another actor to work with. He only wanted a nice thank you and to be sent on his way when he was done. Wilson yelled out to Pat as he was walking away, "Don't you want to take your script with you? You could need it." That one statement sent chills down my spine. Morita had never felt like this before, like maybe, just maybe, he had broken through the wall of doubt that surrounded him. He had come in as a bearded comic. He left as someone who could have easily become Mr. Miyagi. Wilson had already made his choice. He would play that recording again later in meetings while the producers were fighting over who to cast. He just clicked on the monitor while they were working on something once when they were having a furious argument. As Morita's audition came on the screen, the meeting got quiet. Then Weintraub, the same person who had said he wouldn't even think about him, said, "Hey, wait a minute. That looks like Miyagi." Wilson quietly turned around and stated, "That's the Pat Morita you didn't want to read for the part." The tape does prove that Morita could act. It proved that he was Miyagi in a manner that no one else could. It was the break that began to break down the wall of resistance. Of course, Hollywood doesn't give up anything without a fight. Morita was summoned back over and again, even though Abelson's footage was great. They were producers, so they wanted to make sure. Could he do the show again? Is it possible for him to do it in costume? Could he stand up against Ralph Macchio? Morita came through. Once more. Over time, the doubt went away. But it all began with that one camera test. Pat Morita didn't have to deal with a panel of skeptics, instead, he had to deal with the watchful eye of a director who believed in capturing the truth on film. And eventually, the testing would involve more than just him. They would put him next to a young actor from New York to see whether they could really connect with each other. 5 tests, one of which is chemical. Most performers only need one good audition to get a part. 5 times for Pat Morita. The producers wanted more even after John Avildsen's tape won over many who were unsure. They had to be sure that the man they had called a clown could really be Mr. Miyagi's soul. And so began a long and hard series of 5 tests to see if Pat Morita could not only act the part, but also live it. The first 2 tests were just simple reenactments. Could he bring back the same level of intensity and subtlety from his first audition? Could he use Miyagi's calm authority without making it funny or a joke? Every time Morita spoke, he was dignified, talked with weight, and displayed signs of weakness that hinted to Miyagi's deeper narrative. But the third test made things more serious. Ralph Macchio flew in from New York this time. The producers sought to determine if the chemistry between Daniel LaRusso and Mr. Miyagi could be real. There had to be more than just a teacher-student relationship in the script. It was a father and son relationship, with the father as a mentor and guide. The whole movie would fall apart if Morita and Macchio didn't connect. At first, they would read together. Just basic conversations. Then there were the dramatic parts, like the wax-on, wax-off moments, the complete soul-bearing confessions, and the empty silences that scream louder than words. Morita's relationship with Macchio didn't even come close to giving the serious gravitas it needed. Instead, he had a warm, genuine answer. He paid attention. He did something. He led. And gently, Macchio leant against him like he was someone he could trust. That would be the first sign of a cooperation that would hold the whole brand together. The producers could see it, but they needed more information before they could agree. The fourth test included costumes. Would Morita be able to appear like that? He changed totally in a very simple GE, with his beard and hair showing his features. The regular comedy or sitcom star at the nightclub was gone. A man stood in his position, shaped by age, experience, and quiet anguish. Ralph even said later that it was shocking how different Pat looked when he dressed up as Miyagi. It was like he became a character. But in the end, the CEOs of the studios sought more than just promises. The fifth and last exam was the one that sealed the deal. They asked for a reading on a soundstage that was cold and empty. There were no sets or props, only Morita, Makio, and the camera. It was the most stressful thing ever. Was there still magic even when things were really bad? The response came quickly. The two acted like they were used to talking to each other. Morita didn't do anything. He lived in Miyagi. Makio did not say any lines. He was talking to a mentor who seemed extremely real. When the camera stopped, the quiet was so loud it hurt. 5 auditions had shown not only that he could act, but also that he was Miyagi in a way that no one else could even come close to. It was hard, yet it made something that would last forever. After then, Pat Morita and Ralph Macchio were no longer co-stars. Ralph and Pat became Daniel and Miyagi, and their bond was so strong that it lasted through generations. The 5 perfect tests showed that Morita was Miyagi, but it took one phone call from the strongest skeptic to seal his destiny. The call that changed everything. There was still one shadow hanging over Pat Morita when he eventually made it through the obstacle course of auditions, screen tests, and chemistry reads. Jerry Weintraub. The strong producer was the barricade that almost blocked Morita from getting the role in The Karate Kid. He didn't want a funny person to play the part. He didn't think Pat could be a mentor figure who was heavy and serious. Morita's future had been hanging by a thread for weeks because of Weintraub's uncertainty. Then the phone rang, and it changed everything. After the 6th test, Morita and Ralph Macchio, dressed up, performed in front of the studio heads. There weren't any showy karate strikes or sweeping music in the sequence. It was a calm exchange. Miyagi talking to Daniel in that short, jerky pace that Pat had made up out of tiredness and inclination. Daniel didn't answer like an actor reciting lines, he answered like a youngster who was listening to someone who seemed to care. It was more powerful than any action scene because it was so still. Avildsen was as sure of himself as ever. Let the camera run. From the start, he had been Morita's biggest supporter, campaigning for him to be included, keeping his tape in circulation, and playing the film over and again whenever Weintraub got dismissive. Morita and Macchio were now undeniable in front of a large room. There was no laughing or doubt after the test, just silence, a silence so weighty that it could have tipped the scales. Weintraub answered the phone. Morita was on the other end, waiting at home, still not sure if the role he had worked so hard for would go away. Weintraub didn't waste time. His voice, which was typically sharp and hard, sounded different now. He told Pat that he almost made the worst mistake of his life. I just want to be the first to say congratulations. You got the part of Miyagi. Morita desired that job to make up for his mistakes. Not a comedian, not Morita, but announcing to the world in complete defiance. Now the individual who was against him had to eat his words. One phone call changed everything and transformed the balance of power in the production. The room that had once looked down on him was now standing up in reverence. Pat would claim he felt both proud and humble. All at once. He didn't yell, brag, or say how close they had come to leaving him out. He had just taken the job with a sense of pride inside. He realized that this win meant a lot more than just his job. Miyagi was more than just a character. He was meant to be a cultural figure. It was a turning point for Morita in some ways, but it was more of a turning point for the movie. Because Miyagi was also cast, production became stuck. John Avildsen was Ralph Macchio's mentor and best friend. And as a sign of respect, Jerry Weintraub had the courage to apologize when he was incorrect. Pat's success was even sweeter because it was hard. He didn't get the part handed to him. He had to fight through a lot of doubt. With all the strength he could summon, he could now wear Mr. Miyagi's shoes for the first time, with Weintraub's words echoing in his head. But Pat Morita's fight wasn't over even after he got the parts. Once the cameras started rolling, he had to convince people that Miyagi's bad English wasn't funny, but poetic. How Miyagi's voice came to be. Getting the part of Mr. Miyagi was one win. Another thing was giving Miyagi a voice that people would never forget. Pat Morita realized that the way Miyagi spoke could make or break the character. If the voice went too far into caricature, it may have been a stereotype, which is something Hollywood often does with Asian characters. If it were too polished or smooth, it wouldn't mesh with the script's idea of an immigrant janitor and war veteran who acquired English late in life and has broken rhythms. Morita had to strike a balance between being real and being dignified. Ironically, the first spark came from being tired. Morita was fatigued during his first auditions since he had been working hard to prove himself for a long time. He lost energy and his sentences slowed down, falling into short, broken sentences. Morita subsequently said with a wry smile, "That's why Miyagi talks like this." It wasn't intended. He just said what came to mind when he didn't have the energy to think too much. But Avildsen and others recognized something in it. The cadence wasn't silly. It wasn't forced. It had a lot of weight. It seemed like it fit with Miyagi's past. But Morita worked on it very carefully. He liked the concept of a man who spoke English as a second language and took his time with each word. The bad grammar turned into a type of poetry instead of being a flaw. Miyagi informs Daniel that a man who can catch flies with chopsticks can achieve anything. This is not a joke, it is a piece of ancient knowledge. People leant in and listened more closely to the beat, as if every break had a purpose. Later, Ralph Macchio would say that the voice disarmed him at first. He knew Morita as a comic who could talk fast and smoothly. But all of a sudden, that difference was wonderful. He was looking at someone else, who was quiet and even meditative, and words fell like small stones into water. Daniel was full of nervous energy and tripping over his words, but Miyagi, who spoke in terrible English, cooled the air surrounding him. The two rhythms worked together perfectly. Some people in the studio were still worried, of course. Was this too much? Would people laugh for the wrong reasons? Morita has his own problems. He knew that Hollywood had a long history of making fun of people with accents. Not raise. But he believed that if he gave Miyagi dignity and used the voice to tell the truth instead of making fun of it, it would rise beyond the stereotype. And he was right. Miyagi's method of speaking was not only a joke, it was also part of his humor, compassion, and charm. Disenfranchised above his voice, like off-screen, it took great joy in a flowing, almost song-like flow, far from the stiff, halting Miyagi speech. Later interviews revealed this difference about him, which astonished many fans. They could hardly believe it. The well-spoken, funny man who told them stories and talked about his life must have been the same guy who said, "wax on, wax off," in such a stuttering, broken staccato. But that was Morita's art. He made a mask. A performance that fit the person so well that it seemed authentic. That voice grew bigger than an accent. It turned into a character. Kids did impressions. The adults recalled it. Comedians made fun of it. But some of that cultural echo always kept the weight. Morita had brought to life a character who was both funny, sad, and dignified. Morita would face a deeper irony, though, because he was so careful about how he made Miyagi's voice sound. The part that salvaged his career also put him in a situation he could never entirely get out of. Set times that he never forgot. The Karate Kid was more than just a movie for Pat Morita. It was a turning point, a new beginning after years of hard work. The crane kick, the wax-on lessons, and Miyagi's calm advice are all things that people remember about the movie. But Morita himself took home softer memories from the set, moments that shaped his relationship with the cast and his own path. He would never forget these times. One of them was the night shoot for the famous scene where Miyagi is intoxicated. The studio wasn't sure if they should include it. The executives were unsure if audiences would be okay with seeing the wise mentor as weak and devastated by the memory of losing his wife and child in an internment camp. But Morita fought for it. He put everything he had into the moment, and the crew was so shocked by how raw he was as he walked through Miyagi's grief that everyone fell silent. Later, Ralph Macchio said that after the cameras stopped, no one clapped or murmured. They just let Morita be quiet. That night was confirmation to Pat that he could do more than just comedy. He could make people cry. A smaller, less planned moment brought back another memory. The joke about capturing the fly with chopsticks. It was supposed to be a light comedy scene, but Morita made it something more. He played it with an intensity that was almost infantile, his hands steady and his eyes fixed on the impossible task. When Daniel wins instead, the chemistry between them makes them laugh in a way that feels real. Morita liked that short scene since it showed something important. Miyagi was more than just a teacher. He was a person who could laugh, compete, and be shocked. Morita must have loved the time he spent with Ralph Macchio. Ralph was still a teenager when they were filming, and he had to cope with all the problems that come with being famous and under pressure. Morita, who was much older, also had to play a protective role. He educated Ralph about life with gentle humor and his own experiences, both on and off camera. Macchio would later say that their friendship was the core of the movie, both on and off screen. Morita said that the love they had was not fake, it was real and grew stronger every day they worked together. He also remembers how the crew's doubts slowly faded away over time. At one time, some of them wondered if the Happy Days comedian could play the part. But Morita could notice a difference as the days went by. By the time they were filming the tournament sequences, even the stunt squad treated him with the kind of reverence that only individuals of high status get. He wasn't just an actor playing a sensei, to them, he had become one. He kept that regard long after the cameras stopped rolling. This one, like all the other minor things Morita did between takes, was also about getting into Miyagi's voice. Not for the camera. He did this to stay grounded. Sometimes he'd mumble advice in bad English, half in his own style, to make money. They began looking for him, joking that Miyagi was teaching them how to live in a scene change. Morita thought it was special because it showed that Miyagi wasn't just a name. Everyone who came close to him could see him. Morita would later realize that all the laughter, stillness, and interaction were what made the movie great. He understood that much. The crane kick would never die. But he cared about the friendships he developed in the quiet corners of the set. They showed him that something real had grown behind the scenes of Hollywood. And at the very end of his life, when Pat Morita talked about these recollections, it was evident that Mr. Miyagi was more than just a character he played. It was, for real, a gift that changed him as much as he changed it. Pat thought about it one last time and realized that the Karate Kid had given him something that no other endeavor ever had. The possibility to be regarded not as a comedian who got lucky, but as an artist who put his heart into a character that changed the world. If Pat Morita's own words affected how you see the Karate Kid, hit like, tell us your favorite Miyagi moment in the comments, and subscribe for more undiscovered set stories. When you're ready, watch the following film on your screen for another behind-the-scenes reality that performers only told years after.